All right, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the thrilling, incredibly high-stakes events that pushed a nation to the absolute brink of independence. We're looking at a super narrow yet historically explosive window of time here, 1942 to 1943 in India. It's a period completely defined by unparalleled mass heroism, fierce underground resistance, deepening political fractures, and ultimately a staggering human tragedy.
Here's how we're going to break this all down today. We'll start with the breaking point, move into the famous do or die mantra, explore the underground resistance, look at a divided nation, and finally confront the devastation of 1943.
So let's get into part one, the breaking point.
To really understand why this massive struggle erupted exactly when it did, you have to realize it was a total pressure cooker. First, the constitutional deadlock was just stuck because the Crips' mission completely failed to offer Indians any real say in their own future. Meanwhile, everyday people are getting crushed by rising prices and extreme shortages of absolute basics like rice and salt. The government was even commandeering their boats. Add to that, Japanese troops were literally approaching the borders of India. There was this genuine, terrifying fear that the British would roll out a scorched earth policy in places like Assam and Bengal just to slow the Japanese advance, which would destroy Indian land and livelihoods. So by July 1942, this fear of an invasion and the economic squeeze totally forced the Indian leadership's hand. Public faith in British rule had tanked so hard that people were literally pulling their life savings out of banks.
And then you had this specific, deeply offensive catalyst as the British retreated from Southeast Asia ahead of the Japanese. They actually set up two distinct evacuation routes. The bluntly named Black Road was meant for Indian refugees who were essentially just left to fend for themselves, while the White Road was strictly reserved for European refugees. Talk about shattering British prestige, right? These blatantly racist policies expose the absolute stark realities of imperial rule, and let me tell you, it fueled some profound, widespread anger.
Which brings us to Section 2, the do or die mantra.
Look at this unissued blueprint for civil disobedience Gandhi drafted. It's actually a masterclass in nonviolent structural sabotage. He wasn't just telling people to go out and riot, he was systematically dismantling the machinery of the colonial state and doing it without firing a single shot. He told soldiers, hey, stay in your ranks, but absolutely do not fire on your fellow Indians. He told students to just walk out of their classrooms. He instructed peasants to withhold rent from pro-government landlords and told government servants to declare allegiance to the Congress without actually resigning their posts. It's brilliantly specific.
To cement this massive undertaking, Gandhi dropped a mandate that left absolutely zero room for retreat. You know the one, do or die. This wasn't about negotiating for better terms anymore. This was about demanding an immediate end to British rule and setting up a provisional government. And this is a huge twist. Before the movement could even really get off the ground, the British struck first. In the early hours of August 9th, they arrested every major leader overnight. They completely decapitated the movement's command structure. Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, all gone, swept away to unknown destinations. Congress committees were declared unlawful and public meetings were instantly banned. That takes us to part 3, the underground resistance. Because with the famous figures locked up, the movement didn't just fizzle out, it mutated. Younger, unsung heroes took immense personal risks to keep the rebellion's spark alive. When the scheduled leaders were hauled off to prison on August 9th, a relatively unknown young woman named Aruna Asaf Ali bravely stepped right up to preside over the Congress committee session. She hoisted the flag and officially ignited the struggle, completely defying the massive crackdown. And the sheer ingenuity of this underground resistance was just off the charts. You had another young woman, Usha Mehta, starting a literal secret underground radio station right in Bombay. With no central leadership around, these clandestine broadcasts were an absolute lifeline. They offered guidance, boosted morale, and even helped coordinate the distribution of arms. You had everyday citizens acting as couriers, pilots, and train drivers, secretly delivering materials, and even sympathetic police officers passing along classified intel. The element of spontaneity across the country was incredible. People weren't just protesting the government, they were actively replacing it. Ordinary citizens successfully set up their own localized parallel governments completely outside of British control. In Balia, Chittu Pandey basically took over for a week. In Tamluk, the Jatiya Sarkar lasted nearly 2 years. They were organizing cyclone relief, funding schools, redistributing grain. And in Satara, the Prati Sarkar operated from mid-1943 all the way to 1945. They proved unequivocally that the British administrative machine could just be entirely bypassed.
Now let's look at Section 4, a divided nation.
To really grasp this historical moment, we have to take a step back and objectively examine how fractured the political landscape actually was. The nation definitely wasn't acting as a single, unified monolith. While students, peasants, workers, and women formed the absolute backbone of that unparalleled heroism we just talked about, several major political factions deliberately chose to sit this one out. The motivations for those who opposed or boycotted the Quit India movement were super complex. For example, the communists actually supported the British war effort at this point because Russia had been attacked by Nazi Germany. They viewed the conflict as a people's war against fascism. The Muslim League openly opposed the movement, citing deep fears that an abrupt British exit would leave Muslim minorities vulnerable to oppression by the Hindu majority. And the Hindu Mahasabha chose to completely boycott the mass civil disobedience altogether. And this growing political divide wasn't just theoretical. It was actively shaping the future map of the region. The fracture was further cemented in early 1943, when Pakistan Day was officially observed on March 23rd. It signaled some massive shifts in the political aspirations on the subcontinent. The demand for a separate nation was solidifying right in the middle of this intense fight against the British. Meanwhile, what's Gandhi doing? He's still locked away, but he actually manages to outmaneuver his opponents from behind bars. In February 1943, the British demanded he condemn the violence in the streets. Instead, Gandhi goes on a grueling fast to protest the violence of the state itself. By simply refusing to eat and, crucially, refusing to oblige the British by dying, he successfully exposed their brutality, rallied public morale, and sent anti-British sentiment completely through the roof. Which brings us to our final section, the devastation of 1943. Because all of this, the horrors of the ongoing World War, the internal political turmoil, it was drastically compounded by an unimaginable tragedy. Up to 3 million people perished in southwest Bengal in the famine of 1943. Just think about that. 3 million lives lost to starvation, malnutrition, and resulting epidemics like malaria and cholera. And the crucial, heartbreaking point here is that this was fundamentally a man-made famine. It wasn't just a simple drought. The need to feed a massive army meant that vital foodstuffs were deliberately diverted away from the local population. Crucial rice imports from Burma in Southeast Asia had been entirely cut off by the war. On top of all that, you had gross government mismanagement and deliberate profiteering by merchants that just wildly aggravated the crisis. And when the government finally tried to introduce rationing, it was way too little, way too late, and largely confined to the big cities, leaving the rural poor to just starve. So as we conclude this explainer, I really want you to sit with this intense contrast between unparalleled grassroots heroism and staggering institutional tragedy. 1942 to 1943 proved without a doubt that it was no longer possible for the British to rule India without the consent of Indians. But looking at the underground sacrifices, the deep societal divides, and the millions lost in a preventable famine, we have to ask ourselves a really tough question. When a populace completely withdraws its consent to be governed, what is the ultimate human price of that pivotal leap toward independence? Thanks for exploring this vital piece of history with me. Take a moment to think on that and definitely keep digging into the sources.